We brought you a story about Mark McGowan's shine leaving Western Australia, so his successor needs to pick up the pieces. This new poll out this week from Utting Research shows Labor's primary vote has fallen 20 points since May, collapsing to 32%. Despite winning just 2 seats at the 2021 election, the Liberals' primary vote has now risen 9 points to 37. On a two-party preferred basis, the Liberals now lead Labor 54 to 46, a 15% swing from the last poll. Let's look at this a little further. Joining me live now is Simon Welsh, the director at Redbridge Group. Good to see you, Simon. Look, this is one poll and we are still a little away from a state election in WA, but I believe some of your research is picking up this trend at least.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah. Look, I think that result is an extraordinary result, and it's the nature of polling and sampling. Sometimes those things happen, but certainly we are seeing a softening in Labor vote in WA. And look, at a state level, when you've got a leader that had such a strong personal profile, personal identification as Mark McGowan did, and it reached across the aisle. We would often talk to historical Liberal voters and focus groups that quite like Mark McGowan. So you kind of expect that there's going to be a softening. Look, I don't think it's 20%, but there's certainly in our work there's enough now to suggest that there's something happening there at a state level. What I think is actually potentially more interesting is the implications for that federally. So what we're seeing is commensurate with that, a softening in the federal Labor vote in WA, which has particular ramifications because that was the pathway to majority government. We know there's redistributions coming up in WA next time around, which could see a loss of a Labor seat just through that. So the implications for federal parliament are quite considerable here. And so what's sort of happening there is you sort of have to understand the WA voter psyche. So what we see in WA far more than any other state really is a real consciousness of where their wealth comes from, particularly mining and also agriculture industries like that, but where that wealth goes, particularly to the eastern states. And with McGowan in power at the state level and Albanese, two Labor governments in power, what they saw was sort of a meeting of equals between McGowan and Albo, a very strong, popular premier with a prime minister that would be able to keep the federal government, which WA voters see as being traditionally East Coast focused, keep them honest to WA issues and a relevancy to WA. With McGowan gone, this is now creating a problem for federal Labor. So what we're seeing is a sort of almost like a distrust, but certainly a sort of a sense of, well, how relevant is this federal government going to be to us now without McGowan there to keep them honest? So will they sort of just drift back to the East Coast centric kind of behaviours that we've seen from federal governments over the years? So this is sort of underpinning of softness in that federal vote. So Labor government being able to articulate its relevance to WA voters, I think, is going to be incredibly important in the back half of this term.
I wonder how this overlaps with the voice as well for federal government and those relevance issues that you're talking about, because WA is always spoken about as a state that is going to vote no.
Yeah, it's interesting, and look, I don't think it's any mistake that the Liberal Party's sort of been pushing those Indigenous issues recently over there. It's a complex little state in the sense of its population being sort of quite diverse in a sort of political sense. So there will be parts of Perth that will vote quite like parts of Melbourne and parts of Sydney and those sorts of things. Get outside of those quite tightly defined geographies, and for something like the voice, it becomes a much more challenging landscape.
Certainly does. Simon Welsh, good to talk to you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Laura.